This is the last Sunday before Christmas, right? And we are talking. We're concluding our Walking in the Light series. So, for a quick review, we began with Isaiah 2, with a vision of the future Mount Zion displaying its power over the nations, and concluding with the command of the house of Jacob to walk in the light. Then we said that the light shines in the world from John chapter 1. That the light shines in our hearts from 2 Corinthians 4. That the light shines to provide us true wisdom from Ephesians 5. And then God's light cleanses God's people from 1 John 1. And then last week in James 1, we learned that the Father of lights is the perfect giver of all good gifts, and He's the one who gives us this great light. So this morning we're concluding with this famous Christmas passage in Isaiah chapter 9, famous for prophesying the birth of Christ in verse 6. However, there's more to it than just simply the birth of the Messiah, the King of promise. In fact, we're going to see that it is the promised one that is going to deliver His people out of a deep darkness and into a great light. So let's again read the passage together. Isaiah chapter 9, verses 1 through 7. But there will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. In the former time he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them the light has shone. You have multiplied the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil. For the yoke of his burden and the staff for his shoulder, and the rod of his oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For every boot of the tramping warrior in the battle tumult, and every garment rolled in the blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. And his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. On the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness, from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. The light of the Messiah is greater than our deepest darkness. The light of the Messiah is greater than our deepest darkness. The people of the light will be delivered. That's the first point. The people of the light will be delivered. That's what we see in the passage in verses 1 and verses 2. Let me see if I can get you from Isaiah, the beginning of it, up to our verse, right? The first half of the book of Isaiah, the prophet is preaching predominantly judgment to the people of Judah for the rebellion of idolatry against the Lord. Chapters 1 and 2 declares to them, to the people, they will be overthrown and God's justice will be served by other nations. Fast forward to chapter 6, and you get the famous call of Isaiah, in which it reveals the sinfulness of Isaiah, right? Woe is me, I'm an unclean man of unclean lips. And it reveals the sinfulness of the people in light of God's holiness, right? So then chapter 7 is King Ahaz's rebellion, as he refuses to ask God for deliverance against his enemies, quick commercial. If you want to hear a really good sermon on this, Jared Patrick, one of our former interns, who's now the pastor at Southern Heights Baptist Church in Kentucky, preached a good sermon on Isaiah chapter 7. Is doing a good work down there, and I think you'd be delighted. If you remember Jared, you'd be delighted to hear him preach and deliver the good news for sure. We go on. So chapter 7, Ahaz rebels, refuses to ask God for deliverance against his enemies. So God promises a child born of a virgin who will always be with us. Emmanuel, God with us. And Emmanuel knows how to refuse evil and to choose good, unlike Ahaz. But until that birth, the land and people will be deserted, because the Lord will bring upon it his judgment for the people's disobedience. Chapter 8 then identifies Assyria as that instrument of destruction and tells Isaiah not to walk in the way of the people. And the last two verses of chapter 8 sort of give us the people's condition. Isaiah 8, 21 and 22. They, the people, will pass through the land, greatly distressed and hungry. And when they are hungry, they will be enraged and will speak contemptuously against their king and their God, and turn their faces upward. And they will look to the earth. But behold, distress and darkness, the gloom of anguish. And they will be thrust into thick darkness. That's the judgment. The darkness they live in, they have chosen to be that way, and the Lord has thrust them into that thick darkness by his hand. And it's in this setting then that you get Isaiah chapter 9, and he prophesies, even as he tells them this is going to take place, he's like, but there's going to be a great deliverance for his people in the future. There's no gloom. The former time brought into contempt in Zebulun and in Naphtali, but in the latter time he's made a glorious way by the sea. Now Zebulun and Naphtali, they are two northeastern tribes that lie west of the Jordan. So if you have your map, right, you sort of have the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, and then the Dead Sea down at the bottom, right? And everything this direction is the 12 tribes, is the promised land, right? Egypt's over here. And so Naphtali and Zebulun are sort of up here toward the Sea of Galilee. And because they lie so far north, they're the first to be impacted by foreign nations and devastated by Assyria. Their people are literally carried away off into exiles as prisoners of war, as is the rest of Jerusalem. But they're the first. They're far away from Jerusalem in the south, from Judah. Yet even as this district became despised in New Testament times, the Lord is going to bring this region honor and glory by his hand of deliverance. Because see, in the New Testament, this district is known as Capernaum. Familiar? It's where Jesus lived for a time. In fact, he lived there in order to be the fulfillment of this prophecy in Isaiah. Matthew chapter 4, verses 12 through 16. It says, now when he heard that John had been arrested, Jesus, he withdrew into Galilee. And leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum by the sea, in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. The land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, the way of the sea beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles, the people dwelling in darkness have seen a great light. And for those dwelling in the region and shadow of death, on them light has dawned. There's a great deliverance for those people who are in darkness. His name is Jesus. They see this great light. Can you recall any of the miracles that Jesus might have done in Capernaum? Do you remember that the water was turned into wine in Capernaum? Do you remember that Jesus told his disciples to throw out their nets for a great catch, and they got this great mass of fish that they could never get on their own? Remember the little story where Jesus goes and tells the disciples to go catch a fish, and there's a coin in the mouth of the fish in order to pay taxes? His provision. How about the feeding of the 5,000? How about the curse of the fig tree? How about Jesus in the back of the boat, asleep on the storm, on the Sea of Galilee, and the disciples are going, hey, why are you asleep? We're all going to die. And Jesus gets up and walks, and he says, be still. And the storm goes away. How about Jesus walking on water? It's all right here. It's all right here in Capernaum. It's all right here in this region, in this land where deep darkness dwells on the people, but now there's this great, great light. The people in deep darkness of forsaken land and forbidden sin, now they see light taught to them and lived out in miraculous ways in the God of light. Church, you need to keep your eye on the deliverance. We do live in a land of deep darkness, even as Josh prayed. You know, I think I hold the world record for a person who never got on Facebook. I think so. I have never been on Facebook, ever. Until recently, I needed to sell a washer and dryer. If you need a washer and dryer, talk to me afterwards. But I got on Facebook Marketplace. But in order to get on Facebook Marketplace, you have to be on Facebook. So I'm like, ugh. But that's okay. I delved in, and all of a sudden I have all these friends I didn't know that I had, right? I'm like, oh, look at them. I haven't seen people in years, and, the feeds like that. But listen, what I've discovered a little bit on Facebook. There's a deep darkness. I see it in the world. I see it in my news feeds, but now there's another avenue by which I see a deep darkness. I see it in the form of anger, in some of the feeds that take place. I see it in the form of sadness as people have experienced loss of loved ones. And though I can only speculate about certain things, I see it in the form of false happiness. Because people are trying to put forth their image on Facebook, make sure everybody knows everything's okay and everything's good. And yet for a few of those people, I know a little bit about their lives on the back end. I'm like, they're not as happy as this picture says they are. There's a great sadness. There's a deep darkness. But this passage tells us there's deliverance from this darkness. In fact, it tells us two consequences, two outcomes from the deliverance of Christ. One is that there's a great joy. You've multiplied the nation. You've increased its joy. Like the joy at the harvest, or joy when you divide the spoils of war. And the other thing that takes place is that they've relieved the burden. The great light relieves the burden of indebtedness, of slavery. The yoke, the staff, the rod of the oppressor. Which is how the people have this great deliverance. The light brings great deliverance because the enemies of the light are defeated. That's what verses 4 and 5 are telling us. It's over. I mean, it's right there. It's as on the days of Midian. Now, I have to confess to you, when I first read that, I was like, oh, Midian, right? Maybe you remember, maybe you don't, I don't know. But if I tell you Gideon, does that ring a few more bells? Yeah. Yeah, Midian I don't know. Gideon I definitely know. Right? Well, and so I was like, yeah, well, how do I, so how do you defeat, what great battle took place? Well, it's Gideon with his 32,000 men against Midian and their, roughly 120,000 men. How do you overcome that? Well, the Bible gives us the recipe, right? Remember? Here's how you defeat. When you're outnumbered 2 to 3 to 1, something like that, this is what you do. You narrow your army down from 32,000 to 300. That's the first recipe for sure victory in battle. And then the next thing you do is you arm all those men with trumpets and pots and torches, because those are the weapons of choice for any warrior, right? And then what you do is you tell all those men to take the high ground And simultaneously, sort of on the count of three, you tell them to hold a torch in their left hand, a trumpet in their right hand, and simultaneously light the torch, blow the horn, and shout, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." This is how you win the battle. I'm sure all the nations will call me this week to say, "Hey, we got this tough spot. What should we do?" Hey, cakewalk. Torches, horns, loud shouts. You should be the victor. Because when you do this, apparently, the opposing army just cries out and starts fleeing and runs away, and you just chase them down. But we know, I'm attempting to be funny at least. There's not a lot of laughter through the masks there. I know it's probably just muffled. I know you're probably dying inside. But here's the point, right? We know that this is actually not the recipe to win a war. That the only recipe to win the battle for a defeated enemy is the God who leads us into battle. It's the great light who comes to expel the darkness. That's the only way to win the battle. It's the only way the wars ever comes to conclusion for the sake of the Lord. So you and I, when it comes to our battles, when it comes to our personal enemies, well, the only way to defeat that enemy is to be utterly dependent upon the Lord, is to place yourself in a position with a pot and a torch and a horn and be like, "I'm not sure this is going to work. Jesus, I'm just following you." We feel insecure in our flesh, in our sinfulness. We feel insecure when all we have for our security is the name of the Lord. But it's only because we're not in tune with the great light of the universe. Because if you have the great light, if you have Jesus Christ himself, then you have all you need for any battle at any time. That's what, and not only does it just does you win the battle, but the war is done and there is no more war. Look at verse 5. For every boot of the trampling warrior in battle tumult, right? You get this, I get this imagery of when I see the old documentaries of the World War II armies of all kinds, where they just line up and they're being shown off and men are just marching in step, right? And it's just this thunderous noise of the marching boots to war. Well, these boots won't be anymore. Every garment rolled in blood, every boot, every garment, they'll be burned as fuel for the fire. This imagery where war is no more. I no longer need boots. I no longer need war garments. It's over. The enemy's been defeated. So what should you do with this? Well, if this is the end result, then we know this is how it ends, then we should pray for those who are in the middle of the battle today. You can pray for those who are physically in war. You can pray for those in Afghanistan. You can pray for those who are in Yemen. You can pray for those who are in Syria. You can pray for those in Nigeria under the Boko Haram insurgency. All of these places have Christians in them who need to survive and who need to bear witness and need protection. And all of them have people, God's creation, who are in need of a Savior and hoping against hope that this war will end. But they need a greater hope than just the physical war ending. They need an everlasting light that assures them that war will be no more. You can pray for those who are other kinds of real war in time and space. Seems like in our own country, political wars, racial wars. People don't really talk about gang and turf wars any longer, but they're real and exist. It's just not what's in the news because we've got other things to worry about. Man, there's family wars. People can't reconcile, can't come together. Haven't talked in years, decades, because of deep hurts, because of emotional war. These are all real. And they need to know a saving grace of a sovereign king who takes the boots and garments of war and puts them in the fire because they're no longer necessary. And then, of course, there's the war to end all wars. There's this spiritual war. The scriptures tell us that we don't fight against flesh and blood ultimately. We fight against the principalities and the powers of the dark. And the good news is that this war has already been won in the cross and resurrection of the great light, Jesus Christ. It's finished. That's what he said on the cross. And then that's what he accomplished in the resurrection. It is finished. And yet, the battles, they continue to rage. They tell you to rage. They rage, and we got to say, well, how do we fight then? When we preach Ephesians, somewhere toward the very end there, right, somewhere in May or June, you're going to get the spiritual armor of God, and putting it on sure is a good idea. But I have to confess to you, I think probably one of the biggest things I can tell you to do is pray. If in fact the battle at Midian teaches us that it's not with conventional weapons of war by which we're going to win, but by the very name of God that brings victory, then when we're battling these other kinds of wars, there's really so little we can do. Like, I want to stand up here and tell you, hey, church, here's the new vision. We're going to do X, Y, and Z, and we're going to overcome these things. We're going to lead the charge in making these terrible things go away. And no doubt we should lean into this direction or that direction as the Lord leads us and guides us. But the thing that I can tell you most to do is to pray. And sometimes, I know I shouldn't feel this way, but as your pastor, sometimes I feel crazy just saying, hey, here's what you should do. Just get on your knees and pray some more. Hey, here's what you should do. Just take some time, like look at your schedule and just take some time out and just pray right here. Hey, here's what you should do. You should just fast and pray for a day, for 3 days, for a week about this particular thing. And you should put yourself in a place of dependency on the one who can make a difference, who can change it, who's already won the war, but they can take that victory into the battle. So the boots and the garments, they go into the fire. Pray, church. Beg the Lord. Be the persistent widow. Be the unceasing voice on the door of the Lord saying, Lord, hear my cry, hear my cry. We are delivered by the great light. And our enemy has been defeated by this great light. Because of this Savior of light that's been declared in this passage, because of Jesus himself. For to us a child is born. This is what we're celebrating, church. As much fun as trees and families and meals and the like are, it's not going to satisfy. You just want to have another party if Christmas is just a party. But if it's about this child who's born, if it's about this fulfillment, right, in Luke 2, when the angels appear to the shepherds and they say, fear not, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy that will be for all the people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is Christ, the Messiah, the King Messiah, the Christ, the Lord, the ruler over the world and our own hearts. This is the promised one of David, whose throne will be everlasting. This one's born in Bethlehem, the city of David. And it tells us the government will be on his shoulders. He'll rule. There won't be anybody else ruling. He rules. He has the final authority. He has the final say. It will not be a democracy. It will be a theocracy. It will be a God-ruled place, where the wisdom of man is revealed and exposed for where it's fallen, but it's also revealed where God himself gave us that wisdom, and then we'll see it perfected in him. And he'll rule perfectly forever. And because of this, right, we will call, his name shall be called, this futuristic thing. He's born to us. He'll come to a place where he rules and reigns. And we're going to call him Wonderful, because you marvel and delight at his perfection, at his goodness, at his glory. You'll just look at him and you'll just trying to find words. You're like, I don't have words, but I know it's wonderful in my soul in a way that nothing else has made my soul wonder. You'll call him Counselor, because he will give you wisdom for salvation and sanctification in this life, and he will perfect that in that last day. You'll call him Mighty God, because he cannot be overthrown. You will call him Everlasting Father, because the relationship between you and him will never fade or be anything less than son or daughter. He will not leave. He will not abandon. He will not abdicate his role as dad in your life, ever. Oh, you'll call him the Prince of Peace. Who doesn't want a piece of God's peace? But he's not offering a piece of it. He's offering the fullness of it. He's offering you the everlasting peace. Contentment, satisfaction, security. And of the increase of his government, the everlastingness of it, where time is no more, and it just continues to be. And of the increase of peace, there's going to be no end. And on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and uphold it with justice and righteousness. Those two words make me think about the cross. It's the place of both justice and righteousness, where the righteousness of the sacrifice is only truly righteous if Jesus is born from the virgin. There's no impurity in him. And the justice for sin is only paid if he is that perfect son born a virgin. The virgin birth is super important to Christianity and who this Christ child is. Because righteousness and justice uphold it, and there is no righteousness if there's not perfection, and there is no justice if not the right sacrifice is made for the offense sin has made against God the Father. Righteousness and justice of God will uphold it from this time forth and forevermore. And it's the zeal of the Lord that's going to do this. Zeal, right? The great energy or enthusiasm in pursuit of a cause or objective. That's the definition that you can look up and find. And if that's the definition we go by, then for God, it's not just a great energy. It's not a collective energy. He is the source of all power, and it's His power that will accomplish this. His zeal, His enthusiasm, because He loves you, He cares for you, He made you, created you, sustained you, He pursues you, He comes after you, He loves you. He loves you so much, He would sacrifice perfection in eternity to come down as perfect creator into His imperfect, sinful creation. He loves you that much. He has an enthusiasm for you. He wants to be around you. And with this great power and this great joy, He's in pursuit of a cause or an objective. And his cause, church, is his glory, where every knee bows and every tongue confesses, this glorious day where everything's made right. And his objective is that you walk with him. And he will not fail. He wants you to walk with him. He wants you to walk in his light because he loves you and wants his glory to be displayed in your life. Walk in the light. He created Adam and Eve to walk with him in the garden. And because of their sinfulness, they brought in this deep darkness that we now dwell in. And he refuses for his zeal, for his name's sake. He refuses to let the deep darkness reign. I don't know where you are today. I don't know where all of you are at in your lives. But I want you to know, if there is a deep darkness for you, you are not hopeless. The King has come. He's been born of a virgin. He has walked perfectly. He has died and resurrected so that deep darkness does not consume you. He's zealous for your life. He brought his light to us. Christ is that light. The babe in the manger in swaddling clothes, birthed by this virgin teenager unto this husband who wanted to initially leave her until an angel convinces him otherwise. This babe is the everlasting, most brilliant light you could possibly know. Walk in the light.